This is Mrs. Palmer-Quay, and this video will cover the tissues that are found in the human body. I'll also be discussing some of the functions and the locations of these specific tissues. This information is not required for those who are in the standard program, but if you're an honor student, you do need to pay attention to these functions and locations. So tissues are similar cells with a common function, and just for your own information, it's called histology. There are 4 different tissue types that we will be talking about today. Epithelial tissue, which has 8 cell types, connective tissue, which has 19 cell types, muscle tissue, 3 cell types, and nervous tissue, just 2 cell types. So once we get through connective tissue, it'll be all downhill until the end of the video. Epithelial tissue can be identified by the fact that it's closely packed cells. These are found on outer surfaces and inner linings. They provide protection, such as your skin, secretion, the epithelial tissue involved in all of the glands, absorption in your digestive tract, or excretion, removal of waste products in places like the kidneys. Always one surface of epithelial tissue is exposed either to the outside air or to the hollow space inside some organ. Epithelial tissue is also anchored to a basement membrane. This is a protein membrane. It's not a cell, but there always is the basement membrane at the bottom of the epithelial tissue before you get to the connective tissue. Epithelial tissue is also avascular. It is not containing any blood vessels, so any nutrients have to make their way in by diffusion. And the name that we give to specific type of epithelial tissues is determined by the shape of the cells and the number of layers, which will become very clear in a moment. So the first type of tissue I want to talk about is simple squamous. Simple means just one layer, so any kind of simple epithelial tissue will just have one layer. And squamous means flattened cells. They have been squashed. Simple squamous tissues line the alveoli in your lungs. They form the capillary walls. They are the lining of blood vessels and other body cavities. So this diagram is from the Hole's Essential Anatomy textbook. So if you have that textbook, these will look familiar. On this side, all the time, we have just sort of a simple line diagram, and then we have an actual cell slide over here on the right. We see structures because they have been stained. So cells are not purple inside you, but the stain that is used helps highlight certain things, like right where we're able to see the nuclei right there because it's been highlighted by a stain to be a darker color. So we just have this one layer of cells. They are just the cells here on this top part, and so we see the corresponding area over here in this real slide. Here's your basement membrane. And then this down here, which is not colored in on the diagram, is just connective tissue. Here you can see some of the connective tissue fibers. So this is just a single layer of cells, a simple squamous epithelial tissue. So simple, again, one layer. Cuboidal, these are cells that look like little cubes, or at least a little more round as opposed to flattened. These are found in the ovaries, the kidney tubules, different ducts of various glands. So again, you can see here they are epithelial cells that are facing into a hollow organ. So this is an empty space here in the middle. So as I said, they're either on the outside or on the inside of a hollow organ. Here is the basement membrane again that the cells are attached to. So you can see the diagram and then try to make a connection here to the other side. And these down here, we can see that this is from the kidneys in the kidney tubules. Simple columnar, so we've got a column involved, so a single layer of elongated cells, and they often have some kind of cilia or some microvilli, which is just, again, little fingers sticking out, very, very tiny on the top of the cells. And then they also have often goblet cells, which are diagrammed here as these sort of gray cells. These secrete mucus because these are involved in places where you have like your digestive tract, where you want to have some lubrication for things to move along so things get secreted, or inside the uterus, inside the fallopian tubes. The cilia containing cells are involved in the fallopian tubes, passing the egg down from the ovary to the uterus. And the microvilli are found in the digestive tract. So these cells here, where we've got a slide, are coming from the digestive tract. And then stratified tells you that there's more than one layer. So if it's simple, it's one layer. If it's stratified, we've got more than one. And that the top layer are squamous. The top layer are flattened. So down here at the bottom where the cells are being, new cells, they're being born down here, then they work their way up because, of course, epithelial cells are on the outside or the inside of hollow organs, and so there's a lot of wear happening here on the surface, and these cells will be ones that will be worn off, will age out, and so the cells will continue to move up from the bottom. So at the bottom they may be more cuboidal down here next to the basement membrane, but by the time they reach the top they're that squashed, flat, squamous appearance. So the skin is a perfect example of stratified squamous. You've got several layers of cells involved in your skin, and the top ones are flattened. They also are keratinized. They have been filled with a particular protein called keratin, which makes them tougher. Your skin provides quite a bit of protection as you kind of bump and scrape your way through life. The cells on the outermost part of your skin are actually dead, and they can be scraped off without causing you any pain. You also find stratified squamous cells inside the oral cavity, and so that's where these come from. The picture here we have here are coming from the esophagus, where these cells have been taken from. Stratified cuboidal, so you've got more than one layer of cubed-shaped cells. So these are found in the ducts of the mammary glands, or your sweat glands, or your salivary glands, the pancreas. And again, you're facing a hollow space, a hollow organ, basement membrane on the other side, little cuboidal cells, at least more than one layer. So these are coming from the salivary glands that we have our illustration over here. Stratified columnar. You should be getting how these names work now. That they have the top layer will be elongated. Again, the cells nearer the basement membrane may be more cube shaped, but as they mature they become elongated. And so the two places where we find these types of cells are lining part of the male urethra and part of the pharynx, which is the example here is coming from the urethra. So you can see we've got cuboidal cells on the bottom layer and then these tall columnar cells on the top. And then we have a type called pseudo-stratified. They appear to be stratified at first glance. Now stratified again is more than one layer, but if you look carefully at this diagram here and again at the actual stained slide, you will see that all of these cells actually do touch the basement membrane. Some of them, like this one, doesn't make it all the way to the top, but this one next to it, a tiny little bit of it goes down to the basement membrane, even though it's pretty tall. And these also have cilia, like the stratified columnar cells we saw earlier. These are the ones that are in the respiratory passages. The goblet cells that are involved in these, with these cells, are producing the mucus that catch dust particles and the bacteria that you inhale and such, and trap them before they get to your lungs so that you can cough them up and get rid of them. So these look like they are more than one layer of cells, but it is really just a simple layer, just a single layer, but the nuclei are at different levels. Some are higher, some are lower, and it appears to be stratified. So it's a pseudo-stratified columnar. And then the final epithelial layer type of cells is called transitional, and these are found in the bladder or in places where you've got to have stretchy organs, the whole part of the urinary system, because when you don't have any urine, you've got a tiny little bladder, but it really can expand before you get a chance to run to the bathroom. And so the cells they're able to go from sort of short and fat and round to a much longer, thinner appearance, but also you can't really see it in the diagram, but I was just reading about these particular cells, and there are actually extra pieces of cell membrane held in vesicles inside the cell. So when it is in the small state, these are just ready and waiting, and when this cell has to expand, these little vesicles of cell membrane head out to the attached to the cell membrane, and so it actually increases the size of the cell. And then when it shrinks, they go detach and go back inside the cell. So it's a very interesting system that has been designed with the bladder to allow this organ to expand and contract so drastically. So you can just see here it is in the contracted state and then in the expanded state here for a little bit of comparison. So the transitional cells are only found in the bladder and other parts of the urinary system. Then we get to the connective tissue, which contains many, 19 different types of cell types with diverse functions. Your connective tissue helps hold things together. It provides support and protection to different parts of your body. It serves as frameworks, especially for bone development. Fills in spaces in your body, is the place where we store fat. It can help protect us against infections and repair tissue damage. The thing that you know about the connective tissue, or to notice about the connective tissue, is that all types of connective tissue have a large extracellular matrix. So your epithelial cells are all closely packed together. So that's one way to tell. You're looking at a tissue, you say, what is this? Well, if they're all packed closely together, this is epithelial cells. But if there's a cell and then there seems to be a space on the slide and then there's another cell over here and there's another cell over there, well, then that's connective tissue, because this extracellular matrix is one of the distinguishing characteristics of connective tissue. So look at that when you're looking at these slides, trying to figure out, what am I seeing? Are things close to each other? Are cells touching one another? Or is there lots of space in between them? Connective tissue also, in comparison to epithelial tissue, tends to be quite vascular. It has the blood vessels that are bringing the nutrients that then will diffuse from the connective tissue to the epithelial tissue cells. There are three major cell types I'd like you to know. The fibroblasts, which are the most common cell in connective tissue. They produce fibers and tend to have sort of a star shape or pointy shape to it. The mast cells, which if any of you have allergies, you can blame it on your mast cells because they release histamine, which is what gives you that drippy nose and itchy eyes feeling. They also release heparin, which is involved in preventing blood clotting. And the macrophages, which are a wandering cell, the fibroblasts and the mast cells don't go anywhere, but macrophages wander around because they're phagocytic, they're part of the immune system, so they're important because they can go attack bacteria or other viruses, other things that are coming in who might be causing you an infection. So the fibroblasts produce different kinds of fibers. So the three most important fibers are collagenous fibers, which we call, to abbreviate, we tend to talk about that as being collagen, which has a great deal of strength and is involved in holding structures together. Two examples of collagenous fibers are tendons and ligaments. Then you have elastic fibers, which are involved with the protein elastin, microfibrils, and the protein elastin, because they are then elastic. So things that stretch are tending to be made out of elastic fibers. Things like your vocal cords, you want them to stretch and rebound as you're making different sounds. You don't want your voice to just kind of stretch out and become useless. It's involved in your air passages, things that again are expanding and contracting your lungs, your skin. You don't want to be able to rub your face and stretch your face out of shape. We want elastic fibers. Then last, there are the reticular fibers that are very thin fibers of collagen, very branched, and they form supportive networks, especially within organs. If you ever have eaten liver and you kind of know the texture of that, the texture of liver is very much determined by the reticular fibers that are giving it sort of its solid structure. So this is just an illustration of some connective tissue with all these various parts in it. We've got our star shape or sort of pointy-ended fibroblasts that are producing all the fibers. We have collagen fibers here, which are much larger and thicker. And then we've got these thin elastin fibers. We have some fat cells. We'll see those in a minute, the adipose tissue cells. We've got some lymphocytes and mast cells involved in the immune system. We've got a macrophage over here out, ready to phagocytize some bacteria. It's putting out some pseudopods. We've got a nerve running by. Here's an elastic fiber. I'm sorry, these over here are reticular fibers. Here's your elastic fiber, these red ones, slightly bigger. So you see the collagens are thickest, then the elastic fibers, and then the thin little reticular fibers. And then we've got a blood vessel coming through, and see if we miss anything else. Plasma cell, that's another immune system cell. Neutrophils, another immune system cell. So we've got a very rich environment here in your connective tissue. So now we've got to talk about the two different types of connective tissue, things that are called connective tissue proper, the real connective tissue, and then some specialized connective tissue. In the connective tissue proper, we have loose connective tissue, adipose or fat tissue, reticular tissue, dense connective tissue. Over here on the specialized side, we'll talk about cartilage, bone, and blood. Loose connective tissue also has the name areolar tissue. It's mainly made up of fibroblasts and a gel-like matrix containing collagen and elastin fibers. And so we have this loose connective tissue that's binding our skin to underlying muscles. It's filling spaces in between the muscles. It's just sort of everywhere in the body, kind of filling things in. Because, again, you see things in these slides because they are stained. So we've got some thick collagen fiber going this way, just kind of like that illustration I just showed you. Here's your fibroblast, it's staining dark, and you can see some of the thin elastic fibers coming across here. So that's how to interpret these slides. Collagen is big and thick, fibroblasts will always stain dark, and then you can see the elastin fibers as sort of thin threads. So adipose tissue has its own word for fat cells, adipocytes, and these are drawn here. You can see this little diagram. This whole thing is the fat cell. So these lines around here is the cell membrane, and then you have a little tiny nucleus and a little bit of cytoplasm here, and then a whole lot of fat. So basically they're a big lipid drop with a tiny little space left for the cytoplasm and the nucleus, and all of the activity that normally goes on in a cell has to take place in that part. Adipose tissue cushions and insulates various parts of the body. It's a place to store fats for future energy needs, and it's also providing protection beneath our skin, behind our eyeballs, around kidneys, and our heart, places where we want to make sure there's a little bit of cushioning going on. So this particular slide showing you the adipose tissue was coming around a skin gland or a hair, looks like a hair follicle. So this would be the subcutaneous fat, the fat that is found underneath your skin. Reticular connective tissue, okay, so it's containing reticular fibers. And as I said, that's involved in internal organs, so it's found in the liver and the spleen and the various lymphatic organs. So here we're getting a little diagram from the liver. You've got some your fibroblasts here. We've got some mast cells and other white blood cells, and then the thin reticular fibers here in the diagram. And you can try to find those same things over here in this picture. The fibroblasts, of course, are always staining dark, so they're easy to pick out that way. And the white blood cells kind of have these grainy-looking nuclei. Dense connective tissue, that tells you it's going to be packed with something, so it's packed with collagen and elastic. Not very many fibroblasts. You can see just looking at this diagram how they're sort of spread out. This is important for binding your body parts together. So underneath the epithelial tissue that forms your skin, you have a layer of dermis, and then you get down to the loose connective tissue that connects your skin to the underlying muscle layer. So that there's several layers in your just in the outs, as you're moving through the skin down towards your muscle in your body. Dense connective tissue is also very much involved in tendons and ligaments, and if you paid attention when you've eaten a chicken drumstick, you know how tough those are. Dense connective tissue often has a poor blood supply, so it can take quite a while for injuries to tendons or ligaments to heal. This particular type of dense connective tissue, you can see it's coming from a tendon, a connection between the muscle and the bone. And then we get to cartilage, one of the specialized forms of connective tissue. This is a very tough and rigid type of connective tissue. It provides support and framework and a very important role in bone development for babies. You have collagen in a gel-like substance, and the types of, sorry about my spelling here, the types of cells that are found in cartilage that make cartilage are called chondrocytes. They have their own name, and they are found in lacunae, which are little hollow chambers. So you'll see sort of this empty space, and then you'll see the cell inside of it. So that's a characteristic of cartilage, that not only are the cells kind of spread out, again with the extracellular matrix, but you have these lacunae, these empty chambers with the chondrocytes found inside those empty rooms. There's a poor blood supply in the interior of cartilage. There is a covering that has a blood supply, so the blood is brought, the nutrients are brought to the outside of the cartilage and has to diffuse in. And then there are three types: hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage that we'll look at specifically. Hyaline cartilage is the most abundant. It has very, very fine collagenous fibers, and it's found at the end of bones. It's what looks like white glass if you've ever, again, in chicken bones, if you ever notice at the very end of the drumstick, especially when it's raw, you can see how white, the white stuff at the very end were the bones. It also is what makes the end of your nose and certain parts of your respiratory system that need to stay stiff, like around your trachea. You don't want it to collapse, so it has cartilage rings. In the developing embryo, the skeleton is actually first cartilage, and then bone is laid down around it. In fact, when babies are born, the long bones are still cartilage. They aren't done being formed into bones until after birth. So here, as I said, here's the lacunae. You see the cartilage cells, the chondrocytes, are inside little rooms, and then you've got the extracellular matrix where you find the collagen fibers. So then here is the actual slide taken from the end of the ribs. Elastic cartilage will obviously be something that is more elastin in it because it's more bendable, and we find that in our external ear and parts of our larynx. And you know that you can bend your ear, you can sleep on your ear and fold it over, and when you get up you might be a little bit sore, but it rebounds. So here we've got this small, they got the thinner elastin fibers in between in the extracellular matrix, but again you've got the cells that are inside this little empty room, lacunae, all by themselves. Then the last type of cartilage is the fibrocartilage, and this is very, very tough. It's a shock absorber, and it has a very important role to play in intravertebral discs. Boy, I can see I did not do a good proofreading for spelling on this one. Also found in your knees and in the pelvic girdle. So this is tough cartilage that helps absorb the bouncing around that our bones do. You can see how tightly packed it is here in the diagram and then the actual picture. But again, the cells are still in those lacunae. They're still little surrounded by a little bit of empty space. So that gets us through the connective tissue. Then we move on, or through most of the connective tissue, then we move on to bone, which has a very distinct appearance, and we'll be doing a lot more with bone when we get to the skeletal system. But you can see it has a central canal with these concentric rings that go around the outside, so that really nothing else looks like bone. The matrix is composed initially of collagen, and then mineral salts are deposited in between. Bone is a very active tissue that minerals are moving in and moving out all the time. The cells have their own special name. They're osteocytes instead of chondrocytes or some other type of site. In case you haven't figured out, site has to refer to as cell. And so we'll be talking a lot more about this particular type of tissue. But because it does have collagen involved, it is considered part of a specialized connective tissue. And then finally we have blood. I've seen various explanations for why blood is considered part of the connective tissue. One is that, yes, there's a whole lot of extracellular matrix here. Another explanation I've seen is that it forms fibers when it's time to make a blood clot. But for whatever reason, blood is considered connective tissue, and you have red blood cells, various types of white blood cells, platelets. We should have an E in it here. My spelling is atrocious in this video, I apologize. And plasma. You know that blood is involved in nutrient transport. It provides protection by bringing all these white blood cells around, and of course is involved in homeostasis, both by how it is involved in temperature regulation as blood vessels constrict or dilate, and also because it's the transport system for all the various chemicals that will be sending signals around our body. So now we move on to muscle, another type of tissue. Muscle cells are also called muscle fibers. Just to kind of confuse you, we keep on using fibers in several different ways here. Muscle fibers are entire cells. The fibers found in connective tissue are not cells, they are protein. Muscle cells are contractile. They can contract, causing movement. That is their key role. And we have 3 types of muscle cells in our body: skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle. So skeletal muscle is attached to bones, to our skeleton, and it is striated. It has stripes, and as I said, and multinucleated. There are more than one nucleus in a muscle cell because really it comes from many cells merging together before maturation. Your skeletal muscle is under voluntary control. You can contract it and relax it as you want to. It's the only muscle type that is under voluntary control. So this is showing you a slide from skeletal muscle from some leg muscle, and you can see the striations, you can see the stripes, and also that here we've got several nuclei. This is all one muscle cell, not individual cells, multinucleated. Smooth muscle is found in the walls of hollow organs. It's around our blood vessels and our stomach muscles, intestinal muscles. It is under involuntary control. We can't determine how fast our food is digested or how much our aorta contracts. It is not striated, no stripes in smooth muscle. It's also spindle-shaped, which is sort of pointy at both ends here. And there's only one nucleus per cell. So in contrast to skeletal muscle, there are several distinct differences between skeletal muscle and smooth muscle. And here the example is giving some muscle from the digestive tract. Finally, cardiac muscle, found in the heart's wall. It is also striated, like skeletal muscle. It is single nucleus, like smooth muscle, and its cells sort of have this branched shape so that each individual cell is attached to more than one other heart cell. So if you look, try to follow some of the connections here, you get a feel for that. The cells are under involuntary control, and what's interesting about heart cells is that they contract without any neurological impulse. You don't need to have nerves telling your heart it's time to contract. They contract all on their own. And then we're finally down to our last type of tissue, nervous tissue. You find nervous tissue, of course, in your brain and spinal cord and peripheral nerves, and neurons are what have this star-shaped appearance with a long axon. They transmit electrochemical signals, nervous impulses, from the brain to the muscles, or who knows quite how we think, or have memories. Those parts of our brain neurosystem are just kind of beyond understanding at this point. But they aren't the only sort of nerve cells. You also have neuroglia, which are supportive cells for your neurons. They supply nutrients, they bind the neurons to the underlying tissue, they aid in cell-to-cell communication, and so you really need both cell types to have your nervous tissue function correctly. So that provides the overview of the 4 types of tissues. I strongly suggest you go back and look at those slides, get the differences between the different types of tissues in your head, so that if I show you a slide in class, you'll be able to make an educated comment on where the slide came from, what type of tissue it is.